Andrew had already stepped down as a working royal after that disastrous Newsnight interview in 2019, but he's now gone a step further and agreed to relinquish the title or the honours which have been conferred upon him. So why is this happening now? I mean, we can discuss the emerging allegations in Virginia Giuffre's posthumous memoir. But Rachel, I mean, was this always going to happen? Was this always in the running?
So I think everyone in the royal family and sort of in politics knew that when this memoir came out, there was going to be some pretty explosive stuff about Andrew, because this is the vehicle, I guess, in which Virginia Giuffre can go into detail and really tell her side of the story. We've had bits of it over the years. We've had the lawsuits, we've had the settlements where an undisclosed amount of money in the millions, in the high millions, paid by Prince Andrew to Virginia Giuffre, but he still denied it. I didn't come with any kind of acknowledgement or confession or apology. And this book is her telling her story. And it's not just about Andrew, it's about how she came to be involved in the tangled web run by Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. But there is obviously quite a lot of detail, even just in the extracts that have been released, about how she came to meet Prince Andrew, what happened and what that was like for her. So I think anyone who was aware that this book was coming, even after her death in February, will have, I think, preempted that there were going to be some further questions for Andrew to answer, not least because he still maintains that he never met her.
He didn't do anything wrong. It's still his position. It's still his position on Friday when the statement was made. He still denies anything to do with it.
He never met her.
Yeah, the photos are fake. The famous photos are fake. That's something Andrew still maintains.
He still holds that line. And actually, aside from this memoir, which we will get into, we also had the revelation that Andrew had written to Epstein saying, "We are in this together," 3 months after he'd claimed to have ceased contact with him in that interview. Will.
Yeah, I think weirdly, I saw Piers Morgan last week for an interview, and his line on Andrew, he had a couple of lines. One was that he was in a restaurant in Mayfair the other day, and he saw both Princess Eugenie and Beatrice, who were there, and he said what lovely girls they were. So thanks for that, Piers. And then the other line he had about Andrew was that and his line for Epstein generally was that if you're still contacting Jeffrey Epstein after he's been convicted in the late noughties for, child trafficking, then you really should be in the outer darkness. And I think Andrew just for some reason can't accept this. As you say, he denies ever meeting Virginia Giuffre. He clearly doesn't see much wrong with having met Epstein after he's been convicted. The emails that keep being leaked, there's been a drumbeat of them for a while now, just show the extent of his relationship with Epstein as it continued way past this conviction. And that is really where the problem is for Andrew. And, A.N. Wilson said over the weekend that this was the greatest scandal for the monarchy since the abdication crisis. I'm not actually sure about that. I think when Diana died and there was, just that relentless tabloid pressure to bring the Queen down from Balmoral to sort of somehow make the fact that Diana was dead okay. That seems to, there was much more sort of latent republicanism in the British population if you look at surveys of polls at that time. Whereas now I don't really see like a big groundswell for a republic in this country. Although such is the kind of shocking nature of what Andrew continues to deny, you wonder, will that be one of the effects that it has? Like, will public opinion start to change? Certainly there has been some change in public opinion, but it hasn't really pointed towards full-blown republicanism.
Well, yeah, I dug out some of the polling. The gold standard polling on this is from the British Social Attitudes Survey, which has been polling social attitudes on all sorts of different bits of Britain since the 80s. And it actually has found that there is the lowest support for the monarchy since records began. But even so, even though its popularity has massively plummeted, it's still only on 15% who support outright abolition of the monarchy. Yeah. I mean, that has grown since the 3% back in the 80s when they first asked this question. But it's still a minority position to have, despite all of these scandals you were just talking about. Rachel, let's look at the specifics of what Giuffre has written. We only have access to an extract at the moment. We haven't managed to get the book yet. You're going to be reading it tomorrow, I think.
Yes, I'm going to be speed reading it. Most depressing speed read ever, I imagine.
And actually, the extract that is available is pretty harrowing in itself. But what she says specifically about Andrew is she claims the prince believed that having sex with me was his birthright. I mean, obviously he denies the allegations and always has, but I mean, it doesn't get any worse than that, does it, Rachel?
No, not really. And the thing is that at this point, she is 17. She says she looked 17, and the pictures, I think, pretty much confirm that. So even if, and this is sort of widening out from the Andrew issue specifically, even if the men that she was forced, essentially, forced to have sex with, didn't necessarily know that she had been trafficked and didn't know the exact circumstance of how she'd come to be in Epstein's orbit, they would have been able to see that she was very young, that she was very vulnerable, and none of them seemed to have asked any questions about what it was she was doing there or what her motivation might have been. Her motivation, her well-being does not factor at all into that decision-making process. It is a case of the men involved, and occasionally women as well. There are the wives of some of these clients as well. And in the Andrew case, just assuming that she is there, she is available, she is an object, essentially. And that, I think, was one of the really harrowing bits for me, that just her status in this world and the attitudes of her and the other many, many girls like her who were also very, very young and very vulnerable. The attitude was, they're there, they're available. You don't have to
think of them as a person.
You don't have to
They're
think of
just
them
part of the
as a person,
sort of
and that comes
furniture,
through in a lot of the accounts of various incidents that she writes about, and in particular the Prince Andrew one, which yes, he denies.
And I think it's worth sort of contextualizing. Like, what was Andrew's status at this time? Like, how was he thought of? And he wasn't like quite the sort of hero of the Falklands War. He wasn't like the dashing guy with the rose in his mouth in the early 80s. But this is relatively contemporaneous with what Giuffre writes about in her book. So this is Tatler's then editor, Geordie Gregg, interviewed Andrew for his 40th birthday. I think by this time, most people in the British establishment would understand what Andrew is. Maybe not the sex part of it, but everybody knew he was pretty thick and pretty stupid and pretty vile. I think that was pretty well known. But here's what Gregg wrote for Andrew's 40th birthday. Andrew, open, warm, and has a surprising moral strength. He is different from the caricature we apply to him. A strong-minded and unconventional young man. Articulate and forceful, there's certainly no trace of hauteur, remoteness, or even noblesse oblige. Now, that is so wildly off the mark. Like, that would embarrass a North Korean propagandist. Like, it's so bad, but it's the kind of attitude you're talking about. How do people feel that they can treat people like that? Yeah. Why do we build these people up into these total monsters? I mean, we've seen it in other areas of British life, but why do we keep doing this? I think Andrew can only feel that way, that you can look at somebody and treat them like that with that kind of
obsequience.
Because he's been surrounded his whole life by people making what he want happen, and also making what he wanted to think of as himself seem legitimate. Like, if those are the mirrors around you, then that is going to shape your attitude to yourself. And probably he says, he maintains today that he didn't do anything wrong. I would say it's quite likely that he genuinely believes he didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
Because of the context that he was raised in.
Well, let's talk about this news of him relinquishing his titles. There's been some reporting that Prince William was instrumental behind this decision. Will, what do you think of that?
Given the Tatler thing I've just read, I just don't know. I mean, maybe Prince William is up to date with all of this and is taking control of it and has got it by the scruff of the neck, and it's like, Andrew's got to go and it's going to be really tough on him, and William is going to turn the monarchy into one of those...
Quite unsentimental, isn't he?
I mean, perhaps, but I just think there's such a difficulty. It's such a sort of strange area of our country, like royal reporting.
It's not reporting in the normal sense, is it?
Yeah, I mean, what does he think? Maybe he's just been watching Netflix for the last 2 weeks. Like, we've got no idea.
Yeah.
And I think we just have to be so careful. I mean, there's obviously every single newspaper report, and I think the royals are probably some of the last people in the country who read the newspapers every day and are sort of obsessed with newspapers.
Yeah.
Every single newspaper report has said that William was sort of driving this. It was interesting that the king, like the statement that came out on Friday night was, I think it was from the royal household. It wasn't the king. the king didn't come out and say, my brother has disgraced himself. We feel huge amount of sympathy for the victims, including Miss Giuffre and what happened to her. There was none of that, was there? Andrew Loney, who wrote the book entitled, which came out over the summer, was a bestseller about Andrew's very interesting book. He said on Sunday that he thinks a kind of deal was cut between Andrew and the king, in which Andrew agreed to give the titles away, was allowed to continue to deny all of this in order that Beatrice and Eugenie could keep their titles and stay within the royal fold. So that's one thing I think was relatively plausible. But as for William, I really don't know.
Well, it could be plausible because Andrew has not actually officially been stripped of these titles.
He's agreed.
Sounds like he's sort of agreed just not to use them. Because forcibly removing a dukedom takes an act of parliament, and that's not happened in over a century. But that Labour is under pressure to introduce an act of parliament to do this, aren't they? Yeah. Rachel Maskell, Labour MP, said she'd personally consider bringing a bill herself. The SNP leader and Giuffre's own brother also thinks the title should be officially stripped.
Yes, I think Rachel Maskell currently has the Labour whip suspended.
I
just point that out because she is the...
She wrote a diary for the New Statesman just before, so sorry.
Right, okay.
No, the only reason I bring that up is she's not in the government. She's not even currently in the Labour Party, and it'll be really interesting to see if Labour MPs do start to make this case. Because as somebody who's outside, she can be a bit more opinionated, I guess. But there is a really interesting question here. So actually the Crown does not have the power to take titles away, and individuals can't relinquish them. They can say, as Andrew has said, under a significant amount of pressure, we can imagine, I won't use them anymore. But the only body that can do it is Parliament. And I was looking into sort of the history of some of this, and Parliament could, and has done in the past, could pass a private bill, a very short, succinct law that refers to one individual. Right. And they did that with Catherine Howard, for example, sort of stripping them of their titles and all of their land, when Henry VIII wanted to get rid of someone. But Queen Victoria also used this with members of the royal family who took the side of the Kaiser, which I imagine, as you said, they haven't done it for 100 years. That was when, and Winston Churchill considered this legal mechanism for high-profile Nazis, didn't actually use it. So this is something we can do in law, and I've been reading a great column on this by John Oxley, who sometimes writes for the New Statesman, going into sort of the history and the mechanics of it. And I think what's interesting is this is one of those cases where if Parliament wanted to act, they kind of could act. If the government wanted to do something about it, it could. There are levers here that don't get used very often, but they do exist. And if you think about it, it kind of makes more sense for Parliament, that our elected representatives, to say this individual has a whole load of privileges that clearly do not reflect what we believe his conduct has been. Therefore, we're going to act. That makes more sense than kind of asking his family to do it.
That's the thing, because the government line is, this is a matter for the royal family, and apparently they don't want to take up parliamentary time with it. But I think rather famously, the royal family can't just instruct the government to bring an act of parliament, right?
I mean, it's controversial.
And he's still a prince, isn't he? And technically still a councillor of state, which means he could stand in for the king.
I think that's unlikely.
He still has Duke of York personalised number plates for some of his cars.
Oh wow!
So maybe it has to start with taking the number plates away before we get on to whether he should. I mean, this reminded me of William F. Buckley's crack about how the first 100 people in the LA phone book in 1980 would have done a better job running the US government than the actual US government. I think the first 100 people we meet on the street would make better councillors of state than Prince Andrew. I mean, in what world? I think he's still 8th in line to the throne.
Yeah, he's not
that far off it.
Yeah.
He was one plane crash away from King Andrew. But it is, I mean, the legal part is interesting. I mean, royal wills, they're sealed. So the transfers of wealth around this family, how much wealth they actually have,
we don't know.
Complete mystery. Can you ask questions about the royals in the House of Commons and the House of Lords? I don't think you can. Freedom of Information Act definitely doesn't apply to the royals.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see if the government could just crack some of that stuff open. I think a lot of journalists would be very interested in it.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit about the money, actually, because even if you're not interested in this story, you don't care about the royals, there's still a strong public interest in knowing how much of our taxpayers' money is being spent on Andrew and his lifestyle. I think that there's been quite a lot of scrutiny over who's going to pay for this 30-room mansion that he has in Windsor, the Royal Lodge. And we know from a recent biography that the King is no longer giving him a personal allowance or funding his security bill, which is supposed to be several £1 million a year. So how is he actually paying for the upkeep and for his sort of rent at that Royal Lodge and to afford the lifestyle that he has? It's all really opaque, isn't it?
Well, it is interesting. So it's a 30-room mansion, which he has a 75-year lease from the Crown Estate on. We don't really know where that money came from. He's put £10 million into it. It's got a golf course. So apparently he spends most of his time playing golf or playing video games. In his little black box in Windsor. Of course, it's not a black box, it's a 30-room mansion.
In his big black box.
His big black box. I suspect, like, Cherchez la Mer, like, look at, if we could see the Queen's will, we would know a hell of a lot more about Andrew's finances, but we can't see that. I mean, one of the features of Loney's book on Andrew is, like, the Queen just giving him money.
Yeah. He was very obviously
Yeah. So I think that's probably the way that mystery will be solved. But again, we're just not going to find out at the moment.
No, and he was trade envoy, wasn't he? And he could have used some of the personal connections and private meetings.
He had a few friends in Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan.
Always handy to have.
Yeah, why not? I mean, I've got a few. No,
I certainly don't. Not in Azerbaijan.
Kazakh friends, if you're listening, I'm in my overdraft.
I would like the kind of job where, if I got into trouble of some kind, I got downgraded to a 30-room mansion. Wouldn't you like that? Like, that was the punishment. That's the mansion you have to live in. Like, I take that.
According to the Mail, Andrew asked his police protection officer to investigate Giuffre just before the newspaper published a photo of her first meeting with the prince in 2011. So this story in the paper alleges that he gave the officer her date of birth and confidential social security number so he could dig up dirt on her. Obviously, this is not the role of someone who is employed by the Metropolitan Police, therefore paid by the taxpayer. If he wanted to do that, he should have asked like a private detective or something like that. So Rachel, I mean, is there the Met are investigating this? What could the implications be for Andrew?
I suspect that the chances of any criminal case being brought against him are really, really, really low. But I think it comes back to the money question. I think the question about who is paying for his security now is King Charles has said that he isn't, that's being funded privately, but I think there are big questions to answer about that, because what you've got here is somebody who is like not a private citizen, but this is a private citizen matter, trying to use their influence and the apparatus of the British state for their own ends, and big questions there about we were paying for them at the time, right? We were paying for his bodyguards. So there's that aspect of it. I think also other questions about, like, this does kind of reflect on the rest of the royal family, because those emails that the Mail has published suggest that not other members of the royal family, but other kind of administrators, would you call them administrators?
Courtiers.
We're aware, and there are kind of, don't worry, we'll get this sorted. There are sort of questions about, does she have a criminal record? They're going to publish this. We need to get our case ready. And so clearly within the royal family, this was known. And I think we knew that within the royal family it was known. And that came out in that Newsnight interview. That's come out in further sort of dribs and drabs. I think there'll be much more of it in the book when we get to see all of it. There's a bit in there about her accusation that he paid for trolls, or tried to pay for online trolls to harass her and stuff. So I think the next stage of questioning is, beyond Andrew, who else in the royal ecosystem knew what when? There have already been questions about Sarah Ferguson. There are some emails between her and Epstein. That Epstein
had 18 numbers in his little black book for Sarah Ferguson and 16 for Andrew. And yes, more has come out about her. I mean, I think it was at the end of the 80s, it might have been the end of the 90s, forgive me if I'm wrong, but one of the sort of royal courtiers said the greatest threat to the royal family at that time was Sarah Ferguson, like the mad duchess who keeps spending all the money. And I almost feel slightly sorry for her, because it seems as if, I think, up until Andrew's real sort of downfall, she was almost like a bit of a shield for him. Like people always ask, why didn't he kick her out the house? Why didn't he get rid of her HRH title? I think, was she possibly quite useful to have this quite profligate and slightly...
She was the mad one.
Yeah. She's half... Yeah.
She was the profligate
Meanwhile,
one,
he's
not him.
off, you know, doing all this terrible, terrible stuff. So I think part of that mystery, I think, can be sort of... You can kind of reason your way through that one.
Yeah. And of course, so many high-profile figures have been burned by their associations with Epstein. Most recently in the UK, Peter Mandelson, who was the US ambassador. Rachel, he's not named in Giuffre's book or the extract that we have available. What does it say that could potentially have implications for his reputation?
He might be named in the book. We don't know. I doubt it because it's about her first-person experience, and Peter Mandelson, not interested in girls, so sort of not connected to that aspect of it. But I want to read an extract from the extract, if that's all right, because she makes a point about the ecosystem in general that I think is relevant for discussing Mandelson and Donald Trump and all of the other men who we think are possibly associated, but we don't know the full extent. She says, don't be fooled by those in Epstein's circle who said they did not know what he was doing. Epstein not only did not hide what was happening, he took a certain glee in making people watch. And they did watch. Scientists, fundraising... And people did watch. Scientists, fundraisers from Ivy League and other heralded institutions, titans of industry, they watched and they didn't care. And that's something else that comes up in the book a lot, that just this house where there were very young girls wandering around, there were parties going on, there were orgies happening, and people turning up and leaving. Maybe they were involved in that stuff, maybe they weren't, but they couldn't have failed to see it. That comes across very strongly.
Right. Okay, thanks. And it is bad timing, isn't it, all of this scandal unfolding now, because King Charles is preparing for a historic visit to the Vatican.
What does the Pope think of this?
The first time a British monarch and the Pope will pray together since before the Reformation will. I mean, is part of the reason why they want him to drop his titles, because he keeps distracting from what the royals want us to be talking about.
It feels tenuous, doesn't it, at the moment? It does feel a lot more tenuous. I think the Republican thing is something that might happen in the near future, but just like the grip of the monarchy on events feels very... It doesn't feel like, you know, the royal wedding in 2010, when suddenly there was this... I think there was actually like a miniature Elizabethan age, where for the next sort of 12 years after that, all the politics is rubbish and the Tories are crap. And people kind of really respected the Queen and they really looked up to her, and she really had this like solidity. And now with Charles... It just, you know, with Harry and Meghan and now this, it doesn't feel like they quite have a grip on it anymore. And I think the most dangerous thing about Andrew is the kind of questions he poses about things like finances that are just unanswered. And if they were answered, I'm not sure I suspect most people in the country wouldn't like the answer to those questions. And so, you know, praying with the Pope, what is that compared to like the actual wealth of the royal family? If that somehow came out like that, I don't think people would care about him praying with the Pope. Although, what a lovely gesture.
I wonder what he'll be praying for.
The environment and world peace.
Oh, yeah,
obviously.
A lightning bolt to be hurled at Andrew.
At the Royal Lodge.
Yeah.
The Guardian had an interesting line on the titles, actually, that I think is quite relevant for this idea that Parliament could act to strip Andrew of his titles officially. And this is the Guardian live blog, so I don't know who authored it, but being particularly snarky, pointing out that this would raise questions for Labour in general, because if you're going to have an act of Parliament to get rid of one guy's hereditary title, why not do away with hereditary titles? Because actually there are questions that have been bubbling under the surface for decades, but I think that sort of come to the surface with Andrew and privilege and misuse of status and all of that, which are kind of, why do we hang on to these old titles?
Yeah.
Like, why should somebody, just because of who their parents were, be called, you know, His Royal Highness, or this idea there's a special status that you just get from being born, which is something that, hugely contentious. Look at how much trouble the government are having passing anything through the House of Lords at the moment at all, because the House of Lords is having a hissy fit about getting rid of the remaining hereditary peers who sit there. So it is contentious. It is very deep seated. I think if they went and said, yeah, we want to get rid of all hereditary titles, that would just kind of blow up the political agenda for the next couple of weeks. I can see why they don't want to do that. But it is an interesting question. Why do we have hereditary titles? What did Andrew do to deserve the deference that he has been granted his whole life that has led him to behave in the ways that this book and other reports suggest he behaved?
Yeah, and what happens to a dukedom when it lies fallow like that? I mean, every weekend I'm singing the Grand Old Duke of York at library rhyme time. I mean, are they going to pull that from the schedule?
They probably should.
Yeah, they probably should. It's probably scarring our babies. All right, well, anyway.
There's a pub somewhere that's called the Duke of York.
There are a few. I think a lot of them got renamed. There's a spate of renamings.
But isn't there one that's called the Duke of York, and every time there has been a new Duke of York, they change the portrait?
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. So what's it going to be now? Nothing.
Black. Just
a blank space.
A blank space, yeah. Empty chair him.